أستاذ علي، عبد الرحمن الخالدي جاهز؟
آه أهلا، معليش تسمعوني؟
أهلا أهلا عبد الرحمن.
أهلا وسهلا. نعم جاهز.
عبد
أنتظر
الرحمن
خالد.
عبد الرحمن
نعم.
حتفتح فيديو؟
لا للأسف ما عندي
اه،
كاميرا.
اوكي، ما بأس.
ممنوعة. راح أحاول أتكلم بالعربي.
فيك عربي أو إنجليزي دي بتفضلوا يعني؟
تمام.
أم، طيب أنا ستاند باي لما نبتدي البث. هنقفل جميعا الكاميرات. مظبوط. أستاذ
إيه،
علي.
مثل ما بتكون.
تمام. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. مساء الخير، صباح
Good
الخير، وأهلا بكم جميعا في
evening,
اليوم الثاني من المؤتمر السنوي الخامس للمنظمة الأوروبية السعودية لحقوق الإنسان. نشكركم.
morning,
الحضور
everyone,
اليوم
and
الأول
welcome
بشكركم على الحضور
everyone in
المتفاعل
day two of
والمتابعة
the
خلال
fifth
اليوم الأول الذي
annual
خصصناه لتحليل أدوات القمع وتوحيد
conference for
الانتهاكات حقوق
the
الإنسان
European
داخل
Saudi
السعودية خلال
Organization
العقد
for Human
الأخير.
Rights.
واستمعنا
I
أمس
thank
إلى
you for
خبراء
your
وباحثين
attention and when
وشهود
they work
قدموا
was
رؤى
specialized to
معمقة
analyze the
وشهادات
pressures and
إنسانية كشفت جانب مهم جدا
documenting
من
the
الواقع الذي يعيشه
violations
الضحايا،
of
وألقت الضوء على
human
البنية
rights
القانونية
in
التي
Saudi
رسخت في
Arabia in
السياسات
the last
الرسمية
decade.
في ظل
And we
حقوق
have
الإنسان
heard to
ونهجه. اليوم
victims and
الثاني
by the political policies within the rule of Mohammed bin Salman. Day 2,
هو
which is
يوم
the
يذكرنا
human
بعدم
international
تحقق
human
حرية
rights for
الكرامة
human
الإنسانية
rights to remind the
وإحساء
world
العدالة
how
ومحاسبة
important is it
المختلفين
to
ودعم
protect the
أصوات
human
الضحايا في كل مكان.
dignity
اليوم نأخذ
and to
النقاش إلى محاور
devote
جديدة لتحليل
the justice
آثار
and to
عقوبة
hold
الانتهاكات
accountable all of
والإبادات
those
الإقليمية
violators
والدولية. هذا اليوم لا يكتفي برصد الانتهاكات داخل الحدود، بل يتناول
and take a
كيف امتد
stand
أثرها خارج السعودية
and raise
ضد
the voices of
المواطنين
the
في
victims
اليمن
all over the world.
وفلسطين، وكيف
Today, we will
أصبحت
take the
السياسات
discussion to
الإقليمية بما
new
فيها التدخلات
aspects to
العسكرية
analyze
والانتهاكات
the
الأمنية
impacts and
جزءا من
extensions
مشهد
of a
أوسع
decade
أعاد
of
تشكيل
violations. It's
المنطقة
not just
خلال
about
السنوات العشر
documenting
الماضية.
the violations
القمع
inside
العائد
the
على
country,
الحدود
but
حيث تلاحق السلطات السعودية
it
أصواتا معارضة
impacted
ناقش
inside
اليوم
Palestine,
مسألة التهديد في الخارج
including
والدفع على العائلات واستخدام التكنولوجيا
the
الرقمية لمحاصرة
military
المخاوف.
interventions, the
سنتناول ملف
transnational
الحج
repression. We
باعتباره
shall
ساحة جديدة
discuss today the
للسيطرة
threat to
الإدارية
be in
والأمنية
the abroad
إلى
and
جانب
using
أوضاع
the
العمال
as
المهاجرين.
a new
لا
topic
يكتمل
for the
المشهد طبعا دون
administrative
التطرق
and
إلى التعمية الإعلامية والتي
security
أصبحت أداة مركزية
control,
في
and
السياسة
we will
السلطوية في
also speak
السعودية.
about the
كل
media
هذا
obfuscation
وأكثر
or
نحاول أن
blackout, which
نضعه
is
ضمن
restricting
سياق
information in Saudi Arabia.
متكامل
We will try
يوضح كيف
to
لا يمكن فهم
cover
سياسة
all of
الداخل
this
عن
within a
محور
complete
الخارج،
course,
ولا
which
يمكن
will
فهم حجم الانتهاكات
clarify
دون النظر إلى شبكة العلاقات الإقليمية
the
والدولية
policy which
التي
is being
عززت
adopted
الأعداد في
inside,
المنطقة.
and also
ونأمل أن
and
تساهم جلسات اليوم في تشكيل رؤية أوضح لمسارات العمل الحقوقي في خلال السنوات المقبلة، وفي تعزيز الجهود
to
الإقليمية والدولية
understand the extent
الحقوقية
of
المبنية
violation for
على
the years
العدالة
and in
والتحقيق
empowering the
والشهادات
international and
المدنية.
regional
شكرا
efforts
لكم
on
جميعا
human
على
rights,
الحضور
on the
وعلى
documentation of
وجودكم
testimonies.
معنا
Thank you
اليوم.
all for attending
ونبدأ الآن
and for
مع
having you
المؤتمر
today.
الثاني.
We will begin now with the agenda of day 2 for this annual conference.
شكرا لمتابعتكم للفيديو، وكانت فرصة إن احنا نبتدي
Thank you
بنظرة
for
عامة
watching this
على
short
الأمر
video
في
together.
السعودية.
And it
نبدأ
was a
أعمال
chance
المؤتمر
to
اليوم
have a
عليه
general
الحديث
overview on
عن
the situation in
خبراء
Saudi Arabia. Now we will start with our
متحدثين
agenda. We have a group
وشهود،
of experts who will be
ونتمنى أن التسلسل
speaking
يوضح حتى
about their
نظريات
efforts, and I hope the
القمع في السعودية وخارجها. أنا
serial
ياسمين
of
عمر، محامية
speakers will
دولية
tell us more
في
about the
مصر، والتي
hierarchy in
تعمل
Saudi
على
Arabia. My name is Yasmin Omar. I'm
تقديم
an
الإنصاف
international
والعدالة في
attorney
الشرق
from
الأوسط.
Egypt, and
يبدأ
I
أقدم لكم
work on
الآن
human rights,
دكتور سعيد الشهابي،
justice, and
وهو
equality
ناشط
in the Middle
سياسي
East. First of
وصحفي
all, I will
بحريني
like
وعضو
to
في حركة
present you
الشعب
Dr.
الفلسطيني.
Said
يتناول
al-Shahabi,
مداخلته أثر السياسات
who
الخارجية
is
في عهد
from
الملك
Bahrain,
سلمان
who's
على الوضع
political writer
الداخلي
and
في
researcher,
بحرين،
and he will
ويحاول أن
speak
يشرح
about
لنا
the
كيف
impact
أسهم
of
الشعب
King
السعودي
Salman
في ترسيخ
policies in
النهج
Bahrain, and
الأمني
how did the
والسياسي
Saudis
وتقليص
support
المساحات الإعلامية
manifest the
والحقوقية،
political and
وكيف أصبح
security
النموذج البحريني
methodology being
تمثيل
adopted, and
للتحولات
how
الإقليمية
that Bahraini model
هدفا
is a
لتنمية
reflection
الإصلاح
for
والمشاركة الشعبية.
international changes, which has
دكتور سعيد.
restricted the reforms and the popular or people's participation. Dr. Said, you have the platform.
أظن إن دكتور سعيد مش موجود الآن.
I think that Dr.
في
Said
انتظاره
is
ولحد ما يقدر
no
ينضم إلى
longer with
المكالمة.
us now,
بحب أقدم
and
دكتور
as
محمد
we
العمري.
wait him
دكتور محمد
to
العمري
join us
إعلامي
again,
وحقوقي سعودي
I would like to
رئيس
present
الوزيرة
Dr.
للإعلام،
Mohammed
متخصص في الحرية
Al-Omari,
الدينية وإدارة
who is a
الحقوق الاجتماعية.
journalist, a human rights
سيتناول
defender,
مفاهيم
and the head of Al
وهو ملف
Jazeera for
إدارة
media, the
الحدود.
religious
ورغم
events. He
ترويج
will
السعودية
tackle the
لإدارة
Hajj
مثالية
or the
للكنيسة،
pilgrimage.
كشفت
And
منظمات
although the
الحقوقية في
Saudi Arabia has
2023
promoted
عن
that it's
انتهاكات أدت إلى وفاة
managing
آلاف الحجاج. كما اعتقل عشرات الحجاج والمعتمرين بسبب التعبير عن الرأي، وحرم الآلاف من الحج لأسباب سياسية. يتحدث العمري عن الحج كأداة
way.
تسلط.
However, the
تفضل يا دكتور.
organization have documented thousands of violations and thousands even of
واضح أن هناك أزمة في الإنترنت. ننتقل إلى المتحدثة
I
الثالثة، وهي
think
الأستاذة إيمان
there's
سعادة،
a bit
وهي
of
صحفية تعمل
issue
على قضايا حقوق الإنسان والإعلام. وهتكلمنا عن اغتيال جمال خاشقجي، وهو صحفي سعودي خارج نطاق
we
القضاء،
will
وهو
go
علامة
to our third
سوداء في تعامل
speaker,
السعودية مع
human rights
الإعلام.
and media
السعودية
journalists.
بلد
With the
مغلق
journalists,
بلا إعلام
Saudi is a
دستوري،
closed state
وتحتل
without
المرتبة
the
162
independent
عالميا في
media,
حرية
and
الصحافة.
it ranks
عدد من السعوديين لا
162 in
يزال
the
يوقن
freedom
بالاحتجاج، بينما أن الإعلام
of
كله تحت سيطرة
media. A
سلطنة
number
الدولة.
of journalists are
نتحدث
still
كمان عن
detained.
معاناة الصحفيين
Juman will speak
العاملين في
more
الخارج
about the
لمحاولة تحقيق
suffering of
قضايا
the
الحقوق
journalists who
في
work in the
السعودية.
diaspora to cover the human rights issues in Saudi Arabia. Ms. Juman, you have the
Hi,
platform.
can you hear me? Yes. So I'm
هل
going to speak in
يمكنكم
English. I did a report which was called in English Saudi Arabia Influencer and the Regime of Fear, which was broadcast last June on an European channel, which is called arte.tv. And what we try to work on, we got interested in Saudi Arabia because we could see that on social network there were a lot of video promoting the country made by influencers, but also celebrities. And they were saying how Saudi Arabia has changed over the time. But on the contrary, when we talk to NGOs and people who know very well the country, there was a gap between the reality on the ground and the image we had of Saudi Arabia. That's how we launched. We wanted to tackle the subject. I work for a show which is called Sources, and the goal is to do online investigation. So we don't go on the ground, and it was easier to work on Saudi Arabia, as for Western journalists, it's very difficult to have a visa and to go there and to apply for a journalist visa and to film. Nevertheless, the investigation, even if it was only online, it was like really hard. I had to face a lot of obstacles. It was hard to obtain reliable and verified information for multiple reasons. First, there was no official communication at all from the authorities. And when, for example, they arrest someone or sentence them to jail, there is no communication at all. So you have to rely on the information family and friends of the people that is jail have. And it was really hard because they fear talking to the press. In the Saudi press, in the Saudi articles, there were no information about the people that was jailed, or just a few. The only information we had is when people were killed, when they were when they were sentenced to jail and they were killed. Moreover, when they arrest someone, it was hard to get in touch with the friends and family because most of the time, at the beginning, they had no idea that they friends and family were arrested. Um, Sometimes I got rumors about someone being jailed, and I could not confirm it. There is such a regime of fear that it's really, really hard to first get in touch with people, with family that have someone in jail, and then to get in touch with people that were sentenced to jail or that had a fine for expressing themselves online or for other reason, because most of the time after their release they are going through unlimited travel ban, so it's also a way to prevent them from talking to the press. And there is such a regime of fear that all the people I tried to contact in Saudi, no one ever talked to me. So I'm very grateful and happy that you NGO are a good way to have information, because I you at ESORHR, sorry, you helped me a lot to get reliable information, and I'm sure that without you, I would have never done such a report, because it I had to rely on you, on Amnesty, on Human Rights Watch, and I think that this regime of fear is preventing people inside Saudi and outside to talk to the press, but it should not prevent us from continuing on trying to document what is happening in Saudi Arabia, because documenting is necessary, even if it's really difficult and there is a lot of obstacles. I think it's really necessary to to um, to investigate what is really happening on the ground in Saudi Arabia. If you want to see the report, it's still online on YouTube, and it's called "Influencers and the Regime of Fear in Saudi Arabia."
Thank you,
Sorry.
Joanne. Thank you so much. شكرا جوان جزيلا على
Thank you,
مداخلتك.
Juan, for your
كنت عايزة
intervention. And I wanted
أعقب على
to
مداخلتك
comment
اللي علقت
on what
فيها
you have
على قد إيه
mentioned
صعوبة تغطية
about the
هذه الأحداث
difficulty
الأخيرة
of
العربية
covering and
السعودية
documenting the violations in Saudi Arabia
والعقبات التي تواجهكم من
and the
الخارج.
obstacles which you face,
برأيك
although you are
هل
living abroad.
رأيتي أي عمل صحفي على
So,
الأرض داخل
did you
السعودية؟
find any
وما
media
الخطر
work
الذي
in
يشكله
reality, and what
المعتملين
are the
العرب
risks that
تجاه
they
السعودية؟
face if they want to do such a work, such a
I think I'm
journalist's
gonna
work
be
in Saudi
the
Arabia?
translation. Did you ask
Yes, I was
ever if
translating.
any Saudi, if any Western journalist has ever been in Saudi
My
recently,
question
or?
is,
Thank you.
what kind of danger would a journalist on the lands of Saudi Arabia face if they have attempt to write about human rights violations or even rights in general?
Um, I don't know. This is a very tricky question. I know that this year, a journalist from public television did a big report on Saudi Arabia and on how it has changed. There was a little part on the violation and on the human right violation, but it was not like the main subject of all the report. He was also tackling the youth and how modern was Saudi Arabia. And he applied for a tourist visa and he for a journalist visa, and he could film. So I was like very impressed. I don't know. I won't say I won't imagine something, because it has never happened to us here in France. But I know that there are a lot of journalists, and especially some French, that are now in jail for writing things that on human rights, or on the or things that go I won't say any critics on the government, but I would say that they have written things that the government disagree with, and it has happened. For example, now in Algeria, there is a journalist that is actually jailed. So I don't know what would have happened. Maybe I can think that I won't get the visa and I won't go on the ground, but it has never happened to me, and I don't know if it has ever happened to my colleagues, so I don't know.
شكرا جزيلا أستاذة جوان على المداخلة وعلى التوضيح. الأستاذة جوان
Thank
عبرت
you,
عن
Juan, for your intervention and for your clarification. She has expressed a reality which is encountered by everyone who wants to document the violations in Saudi Arabia, even from the diaspora. On the other hand, on the other part of the world, no one is safe, even those defending human rights outside, the journalists, the activists, they are being subject to repression in different types. That's why today we have a lot of guests who came to express and speak about their own stories and the stories of others. I would like to present Dr. Abdurrahman Al-Khalidi, who is a Saudi citizen seeking asylum in Bulgaria, and he is at risk of deportation. He has left Saudi Arabia in 2013, fearing his safety after being called by the public prosecution, and since then, his suffering has started on 23 of October 2021. The Bulgarian authorities have arrested him after trespassing the Turkish-Bulgarian borders. Abdurrahman will speak about the violations he has encountered and the role of Saudi Arabia in these violations and its continuity. Please, Mr. Abdurrahman, you have the platform. Thank you. Yasmin, thank you, everyone. And I hope that my voice is clear.
But Dua told me there is translation, so I will speak in Arabic directly. شكرا للتعريف.
سوف أتحدث باللغة. I will speak in Arabic.
يستطيع أي شخص أن يبحث.
A very brief introduction. So anyone who can Google my name can find a few information about me. My name is Abdurrahman Khalidi, a Saudi citizen. I'm born in 1990 in Saudi Arabia. I have escaped Saudi Arabia since 2012-2013 after we have participated in campaigns for the rights of detainees. I was very young, and we have participated with elder like the Al-Hassam Association for Social and Legal Rights Association, and rest in peace all of the members who have actually passed away. I have left Saudi Arabia in 2013. I went to Egypt, Qatar, Turkey. I've worked in many projects, some of them related or with the late Jamal Khashoggi, who was also killed. And then I have went to Bulgaria, and I was detained since October 2021 in a closed detention center. My asylum was a unique experience. Before applying for the asylum, the authorities have chosen a security administrative tool to detainship, and they have accused me of threatening the national security without providing any evidence. And as we all know, for the legal procedure, and as per the European lists and the asylum lists, the first decision spoke randomly about a lot of falsified information, my origin country, contradicting information for what I have applied. The court and the Supreme Court have appealed this decision more than once and spoke that the acclamations of Bulgaria, according to the Saudi authorities' information, are not trust, and they are all falsified information. So all of the cases in the Supreme Court which are related to my asylum. I have won them. The first case, the Supreme Council have refused the security interventions in my case, and they have said the National Security Department don't have the right in taking decision in my file or objecting to granting me asylum, as the Bulgarian authorities have practiced against me. And they have cancelled all of the decisions of the other courts against me, and they are reconsidering my asylum file. Then I had another rejection for my asylum, and it included other reasons. They have ignored all of the testimonies. A group of Saudi authorities have came to Bulgaria and have testified against me, and they have neglected all of the evidence that I have provided, and they have adopted some sources in Egypt, like where did he bring his income to spend on himself in Egypt. The courts were actually for the absurdity and the decisions of the asylum decision makers. The courts 3 times have judged upon, 2 of which to set me free and to release me immediately without any appeal. And after 18th of January 2020, I was supposed to set free. However, on 22nd of January, the authorities issued an administrative decision to reject the jurisdiction decision. This is actually a criminal crime as per the criminal procedure law. As per one of its articles, to not execute an order of a public employee for a legal decision. And February 7, they have issued a decision on expelling me from EU for 10 years. And 26th of March 2026, I received a non-appealing decision to release me immediately. On the 28th of March, they have taken me to a deportation to execute the old expelling decision. So the purpose or the aim behind all of these decisions was for personal interests. And I have applied for a decision before the International Court for Human Rights, and we are still waiting for its decision. And you can check my accounts. I was classified as a threat for the national security of Bulgaria is actually a falsified information administrative-wise to abstain from granting me the asylum and the right to freedom. I was defending myself to drop all of these charges against me and how these charges were politicized. I was investigated with, we had a security officer from Saudi Arabia in Bulgaria, and they only asked me about my family and about my life in Saudi Arabia. After a while, I had questions which were taken from my father after investigating him, my father, and all of the questions in Bulgaria were outsourced from Saudi Arabia. There was unclear translation also, especially while investigating with me from the Bulgarian authorities. All of these investigations were actually unofficial. And one of them told me, you will never have this asylum. We control over the jurisdiction and all of the security departments. You thought that if you have left the Middle East that you are free. Unfortunately, we are still practicing what we can do in Middle East. I was defending myself to prove my innocence and to prove that these charges are totally falsified and manipulated by the authorities. Even the administrative mechanism there is no criminal basis for this classification. However, what does this mean? Does this mean that I'm innocent from this classification or my being accused by this? It means nothing, because jurisdiction is for the good and the bad, and the justice system is out there. And if the justice system have actually judged upon my interest several times, so I believe that this explains the whole scene inside Bulgaria. Bulgaria today, we have a lot of protests to outthrow the government since 2019.
عفوا، الشاشة تم مشاركتها من قبل حد.
ما
اتفضل
أعرف.
It appears that someone has shared their screen.
اليوم في مظاهرات أيضا.
So today there are protests all over Bulgaria, and there is a parliamentary session to overthrow the government since 2019. Bulgaria has shared with Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia in a deal
الصحفيين الاستقصائيين وبعض البرامج الاستقصائية وصفقة الفساد
related to some of the investigators, journalists in September 2019, which has introduced the restriction of their work to Russia invasion of Ukraine, and Saudi Arabia also took over things related to Balkan Stream and Turkish Stream, and Saudi took over the foundation stream and transportation stream, and all of the contractors and the whole company was run by Russian, and there was an agreement over that Saudi Arabia is the biggest investor in telecommunications in Bulgaria. Saudi has took over the infrastructure and the telecommunications in Bulgaria, and it has conditioned that all of these telecommunications infrastructure that they manage and the investing between Saudi Arabia and Bulgaria are taken over by Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying that this is corrupted or there are special relations between the government in Bulgaria, and especially their relationship with Mohammed bin Salman. However, having these interests of Saudi Arabia in Bulgaria, and that the Bulgarian authorities adopt all of these deals, I think this will create a certain political direct ambience and impact. And last November, the Minister of Interior Affairs have visited the Saudi Minister of Interior after the visit of Mohammed bin Salman. The goal behind that was to coordinate the mechanism of cooperation between the Prime Ministry of Arab, which is known as Arab Interpol, the Council of Ministers of Interior in the Arab world, which is known by the Arab Interpol, and the European authorities or the European police. They had a cooperation with the School of Prince Nayef for security studies and a security deal between the Saudi authorities and Bulgarian authorities related to the immigration and the security management for the files of immigration. And all of these deals are still delayed in the official departments in Saudi Arabia, including the Ministry of Interior Affairs. The practices of Bulgarian authorities trespasses cooperation with Saudi Arabia. It is a dictatorship policy against the migrants or immigrants from Russia, Belarus, and other places. They are being faced or encountering by similar maltreatment. Saudi Arabia has a transnational repression and it uses all of the tools. Its personal relationship using its strategic influence, interests and infrastructure to influence the inside decision. Bulgaria has the ban for my entry. However, after going to Manchester, after European pressures, after other countries have pressured like Germany, Bulgaria have sent my file to several European countries inside Schengen and stating I was a human rights defender. So can you actually take this burden away from me? This contradiction unveils the crisis which Bulgaria has encountered due to its cooperation with the transnational repression practiced by Saudi Arabia. The European Saudi Organization was among the first who highlighted my case. They helped me in one more than aspect in media or publishing statements before the United Nations and in my asylum file. So that's why I would like to thank you and to thank all of the other organizations, journalists, and to highlight again that the security cooperation mechanisms between the European countries and the Saudi Arabia and the other Arab countries and the corruption deals between Russia and Saudi Arabia and Bulgaria and other Balkan countries or European countries. The ambassador of Bulgaria in Russia have spoken bluntly about that. And he spoke about my case, that the case of Abdurrahman Al-Khalidi is related to the in-depth relationship between Bulgaria and Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Mr. Abdurrahman, for your very powerful statement and sharing all of these horrific details for the transnational repression. And as you have mentioned, that Saudi Arabia is practicing transnational repression and has resources and power which enables it to purchase and control the policies of other countries.
الدكتور سعيد الشهابي ولكن نظرا لضعف الانترنت ما كانش موجود ولكنه موجود
in order to oppress
دكتور سعيد وهو ناشط سياسي وصحفي بحريني وعضو في
welcome Dr. Said, who is a political writer and researcher and a member in Bahrain movement. He will speak about the Gulf under King Salman in Bahrain as a model and the regional changes which has restricted the reforms and the people's participation. Please, Dr. Said, you have the platform. Thank you, Mrs. Yasmin, and thank you for everyone who is attending. Peace be upon you all. This event was awaited since a while because the situation in the Gulf countries and especially in Saudi Arabia has its impacts on the Gulf region. The bigger sister is the one who is controlling the Gulf policies, not just at the level of offshore relationship, but also in the internal situation. The Saudi Arabia has always influenced the situation in Kuwait and to freeze or stop its democratic practices in Bahrain, which is also one of the tools of Saudi Arabia at the level of political practices, Gulf-wise, or the internal situation in Bahrain. Let's not forget that in 2011, after the People's Revolution has launched on the 14th of February that year, and the Arab Spring back then, Saudi Arabia was the country who has sent its troops through the bridge relating between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and after a few days, They were in Bahrain on the 14th of March, and after the launch of revolution on 14th of February, the Saudi troops have crossed the bridge to take over the revolution, and a lot of citizens were martyred. We have Ahmad Farhat, whose skull has been damaged, and we can see the horrific practices by the Saudi troops. The Saudi has been silent a little bit about the experience of Kuwait. Kuwait experience since 1961, before having the Gulf Council being established in 1981. And since the Gulf Council, the biggest sister, is now taking over or controlling all of the big and small details in the Gulf region, it would call for the foreign troops in 1990, I think, to invade Kuwait. It also called for the American troops, and the Saudi territories were actually military US bases. The region back then against Iraq, I mean, and Iraq was destroyed, especially its infrastructure. What I'm saying here is that Saudi Arabia doesn't want any change to happen without its approval, and if anything happens otherwise, it will either intervene directly, as it did in Yemen, or as it tried in Bahrain, or it will call for the foreign troops if it was a big challenge, as that was in Iraq back then. So if that challenge was big, they will call for the help of the US troops to intervene to guarantee their hegemony over the region. So the US has a fixed policy in the Middle East, which has two pillars. First of all, that Israel, the Zionist entity, will have the absolute hegemony over the Arab world. This is a fixed policy to support the military proceeding over the Arab world, and that Saudi Arabia will have the regional hegemony over the Gulf region, which is a source for petroleum and sales markets for the US. So there can be no bargain over this, and this policy has continued up to today. The interference of Saudi Arabia to repress all of these Arab revolutions was very clear. Especially it was clear in the direct military intervention in Bahrain. After 1 month from the revolution there, Saudi Arabia wants to keep the situation as it is without having any changes. However, people have another thoughts and their own attitudes. They overthrow Mubarak in Egypt. However, now Saudi Arabia have retrieved some of its strength and facing Yemen and change in Syria, and it's seeking to influence the situation in Iraq. If it wasn't able directly, it can do it indirectly through the money, big funding or huge funding in the countries which its governments accept the interference of Saudi Arabia financial-wise. The problem here is that the whole countries will remain as internally as for democratic changes, because Saudi Arabia is refusing to have any changes because it fears that any change will reflect internally in Saudi Arabia. And the Bahrain experience was very clear in that if we allow to have a change in Bahrain, then this will reflect quickly on the eastern region, at least, especially with the bridge that's connecting, which was established in more 50 years ago. This bridge was the greatest element for the Saudi impact in the region because it was used for the military intervention of its troops on the 14th of March 2011. So in Bahrain, we are besieged. Historical wise, we have the UK hegemony and the UK presence. And what's more dangerous is the Saudi hegemony, which is purchasing the government with money, with weapons, with troops, and pressuring the people through using the force, and which can lead to killing or injuring the people, as happened for the protesters in 2011, where this the fate will be. We will always have movements and produce new revolutions. In the beginning of the 80s, the Eastern region revolution was very strong in 1993, 1994, also in Riyadh. The Legal Rights Committee was founded, and they have really opposed the Saudi regime. And also we have the defiance in Yemen and in Iraq. So Saudi Arabia is surrounded by changes. It's true that it's being successful in oppressing all of these movements and contributing and doing so, even if it was outside their pretext. But they are not as strong as they seem. They cannot stop the historical movement. This cannot be stopped by military force or by financial force. The Gulf cannot remain delinquent from the whole world in the political field or the human rights field. This cannot be, they cannot remain constrained to families who are actually related or connected to the US authorities. And lately, with the communication with Israel, and Saudi Arabia is actually betting on that. Also communicating with the occupants benefit them when in need, especially against the movements which seek change, reforms, revolution, which are refused by the Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia as well. Saudi Arabia has a lot of funds. It has practiced the most awful crimes, as you have mentioned about the late Jamal Khashoggi, also the killing of Sheikh Nimr in the eastern region with a very cold blood, and tons who have revolted against the Saudi region. And from the beginning of the 80s, and Jayman al-Taibi revolution in 1970, who has sought the Mecca, but he was killed with around 40 other people with them who were protesting there. So what I'm saying here is that Saudi Arabia is using the most barbaric force tools and coalitions with the foreign authorities, and supporting all of these regimes inside the region and outside in order to prevent any democratic change. The Gulf countries are inside it. I'm saying here that our people should take into consideration that they're not facing their regimes as well, but they are actually facing Saudi Arabia, which is using sometimes the Gulf Countries Council to intervene. And even if it wanted without using it, like happened in Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia have interfered even without its approval in Bahrain. So we do have a struggle with the oppression, with the inheritance regime, tribal regime, which was subjected upon us since decades. And we believe the people will say their word at the end, and they are capable of change by God's will, and peace be upon you. Thank you so much, Dr. Said. I thank you for mentioning the historical course and background, because a lot of people who follow the oppression and repression in Saudi Arabia do not take into consideration the historical background. And thank you for highlighting the efforts of Saudi Arabia to spreading the dictatorship, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the whole region, and always seeks to keep the situation as is through using the terminology of stability and others. Thank you for your participation. I would like to present Dr. Muhammad Al-Omari. I presented him at first due to the bad internet connection. Dr. Muhammad Al-Omari is a Saudi writer, researcher, and the head of Al Jazeera Center for Media and for Religious Events, and specialist in the religious background. He will speak about the pilgrimage, the Hajj, and the practices which have led to the killing of thousands of pilgrims and how it's being used as a tool of control. Please, you have the platform. Thank you so much. Peace be upon you. I would like to thank Mrs. Yasmin, as well as Mr. Ali Ad-Dubaisi and this blessed organization. And I would like to thank all of distinguished guests and those who are listening to us. And also, I would like to thank Dr. Said. We have met before. First of all, one of the biggest issues for pilgrimage before 100 years, the pilgrimage concept was as countries, and when these were divided, and Al-Hijaz was a part of Saudi Arabia, so it has took over the administration and prevented the funding and the support. As we know, as we all know, that Egypt used to support the cloth of the Kaaba, and also even the olive trees support to the Mecca were stopped. And when Sultan Darfur Ali Dinar have Saudi Arabia prevents some of the countries or individuals due to their political attitudes in giving them entry visas. The Saudi Arabia, it is deporting the pilgrims forcibly. It will give them the pilgrim visa, and if they reach the Jeddah airport, it prevents them from entering, whether they were journalists, religious men, individuals. One of the merciful practices, it would deport them back to their countries. But if this thing alleviates, probably they will be detained and accused of charges that they haven't committed. The Saudi Arabia says that it doesn't politicize the pilgrimage, and its concept is actually preventing any solidarity with any case of Muslims. Although the message of pilgrimage is to be in solidarity with each other, why they are preventing that? Of course, we know that they are supporting the blue Zionist entity, because the most focus is on Palestine. It's an old case. However, Saudi Arabia is monopolizing the pilgrimage for it. It wants to have the pilgrimage only Saudi and not a Muslim Hajj or an Islamic Hajj or pilgrimage. That's why it has connected this, even in the terminology that they have or they are using, that the guests of God are coming, the guests of God are leaving. Now the terminology has shifted into the guests of Salman have come, the guests of Salman have left. So here we can use the shift even in the use of terminology. The other thing that when the pilgrims will reach the Jeddah port, or the salons and the Jeddah airports. They will have big panels thanking the king and thanking the Saudi government for this performance in managing the pilgrimage. And also the media is doing some interviews and doing a lot of big panels. One of the main problematics is Saudization of the religious speeches, whether in Arafat's speech or in the Friday speech in the Mecca or Medina. They will always praise the king, the relatives of the king, and whoever works with the king. And they will devote the loyalty to this king family, although that the Muslims are not related political-wise to this ruler. They came from their country, they have already elected their presidents, so there is no actual devotion for this royal family. So when like 3 million would attend the Arafah speech, we will have the speaker speaking for around minutes, up to 15 minutes, about praising the king. For example, we will have massacres being committed in Palestine, but no one will bring this subject. They will only speak about the Pledge of Allegiance for the king and his family. Half of the speech would be politicized for praising the king or pledging allegiance for the king and his family, and the third risky thing is politicizing the dua, which is the prayer to be approved or not. So of course, if the prayer or dua is something which concerns the Muslims, then it's prohibited. However, if it's a prayer or a dua which concerns the king and praising him, then yes, it is approved. And then after the pilgrimage, they will do a celebration for the success of the pilgrimage. The king will have a speech, and also some of the guests, and among them, which is an annual Saudi, they will bring a poet who is also a soldier or a militant. He will not only praise the king, some of them will politicize, and they will criticize some of the other countries. Praise the king, sisters, brothers. The other part is the political trap. Unfortunately, the pilgrimage has become a political trap, not just the Saudis. And Saudi Arabia is excelling in these criminal practices. It is detaining some of the activists, even if they are holding European nationalities. In the last 10 years, we have a lot of cases which were documented even in the media and in other organizations. The Abdulaziz Airport has a lot of lists, and everyone who is wanted, and they would be kidnapped from the airport and would be sanctioned or deported back to their countries. The King Abdulaziz Airport has a lot of lists with names, and by the way, it's not related to specific nationalities. Some times these are US lists of names and related to the international policies. That's why a while ago the Egyptian lists were prohibited from the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage will always be politicized in some way or another. If an event happened and it contradicted their policies, then they will prevent that. We have seen that when the ties with Iran would be tensed, then they will prevent also them from visas for pilgrimage. This also happens with Iraq and also happens with Qatar. And the borders will be closed. The airplanes will be prohibited from going to these countries. They will tell them like, go to Kuwait and come back, go to Iraq and come back. They have a lot of tools being used. One of the awful tools is hitting those pilgrimage, whether they were men or women. They would be detained from 3-4 years. Families would be separated. Sometimes the mother would be detained and the father would be deported with the remaining children. And there are a lot of cases documented in one of the parts of the video during the last 2 years. One of the cases, without any reason, 4 Libyan pilgrims, when they reached the King Abdulaziz airport, they canceled their visas with the pretext that they are false, and they were brought back to Egypt and then to the east of Libya, which has a lot of issues, and was handed over to Haftar forces. Also, the journalist, the Egyptian journalist Rania Al-Hassan, she was tweeting in Egypt, and when she reached Saudi Arabia, she was detained and she was judged because she was tweeting over the Yemeni issue and the Egyptian issue. Also, one of the cases, which is the Uyghur Muslims, one lady was detained with her daughter for 13 years, and the pretext is that her husband was in China wanted. And we all know the situation in China, how it is for the Muslim Uyghur. And also we have the spying or using the AI, artificial intelligence, and the technology of identifying the face to monitoring the pilgrims and sharing this information with the foreign intelligence, and not only the intelligence of the country itself. And with what's related to Palestine, Sheikh Mustafa Kefi was arrested, and more than one pilgrim from Algeria, they were imprisoned because they were only praying for Palestine. They weren't even holding a slogan, but then they will have a spy next to them and they will report that they prayed for Palestine, and they consider this as a massive crime. And you can find the Palestinian who would go to Quds and praying against the Zionist entity, and they would do nothing. So but I want to say here that the Saudi practices here is very bizarre, and being sensitive against this is very bizarre. And also we have the services related issue. The journalist Salam Subhi, he has criticized the mismanagement in some of the services of pilgrims 2 years ago, and he has documented that he was detained. What's weird about this, he was trialed in a very tragic situation. Some of the praisers from the other Muslim countries, they would praise the services which are provided by Saudi government, and they are publishing that, and they are being also praised, and they become of their soldier. I will be brief here that the Saudi government is dealing with the religious places as private locations, and they don't consider it a property of the Ummah or the Islamic nation to do the religious pilgrim. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad, and thank you for clarifying this image at the Saudi repression, which trespasses the borders to every Muslim who go for pilgrimage or are related to Saudi Arabia because they are well Muslims. So thank you for clarifying all of these points. And before going to other speakers, I would like to give everyone 5 minutes break before we return back to continue this discussion, and we will hear the intervention of Mrs. Basma Mustafa. Thank you. See you after 5 minutes.
هلا. نعم أستاذ محمد.
أستاذ ملاك،
نعم.
ما بعرف لك كيف ليش فصل عندي، ما بعرف طلع من
احنا ب5 دقائق بريك أستاذ محمد.
أيوة خير إن شاء الله. أوكي.
إن شاء الله نعاود كمان 4 دقائق بالضبط.
أوكي تمام.
السلام عليكم مرة أخرى، أتمنى
Peace
تكون
be
5
upon
دقائق
you again
كافية.
and greetings. I hope that 5 minutes were an enough break. I would like to welcome you again in the 5th annual conference on the victims of Saudi Arabia violations, which is organized by the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights. I would like to thank you for your participation, for your attendance. My name is Yasmin Omar. I'm a human rights international attorney from Egypt, and I'm pleased to go back to the moderating this discussion with Dr. Basma Mustafa, who will speak about the transnational repression. She is an Egyptian journalist who was detained 3 times. She lives in Salman in Berlin, and she is the director of programs in Law and Democracy Support Foundation, and she cooperates with international mechanisms to defend democracy and state of law. Her work documents the violations of human rights and protecting the voices who are at risk of danger. Today, Mrs. Basma will speak about the activists Arabia from Morocco, who was handed over to Saudi Arabia, despite the recommendations which said not to do that. And the report has documented the violations against the defenders, even in the diaspora. She will speak about the transnational repression and the new tools that are being used by the regimes for silencing the voices in the diaspora. Mrs. Basma, please, you have the platform. Thank you so much, Mrs. Yasmin, for the introduction, and also for the colleagues in the European Saudi Organization for organizing this conference, and especially for highlighting the transnational repression on the agenda, because this actually clarifies how even as silent as place for the journalists and the human rights defenders, and the testimony of Abdurrahman al-Khalidi testimony and experience also can tell us more how they can practice this repression. And I hope that Abdurrahman al-Khalidi and everyone with similar story will live in safety and be free, because it's a basic right, basic human right for all of us, especially as a journalists and human rights defenders. The transnational repression as a terminology which is used to describe the practices which are conducted by the authority apparatus or the governments against their opponents, or even those who are outside their geographical borders, to silence them or prevent them from practicing their political or human rights or journalist work. The transnational repression manifests in a lot of specific aspects, which includes monitoring, spying, censorship, falsifying their reputation, the physical torture, kidnapping, killing, disappearing forcibly, the spreading the names in the Interpol lists, or exercising pressure on the hosting countries to deport these individuals. As we have heard the testimony of Abdurrahman al-Khalidi in Saudi Arabia, it's a very blunt example as a country which practices the transnational repression. And here we have a clearer image, especially with the killing of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate. And this murder of Jamal Khashoggi is not a separate murder, but it's a course of terrorizing for the Saudi defenders and the diaspora. And we have read a lot of cases of bringing back even persons forcibly back to the country. Even some of them were members of the ruling family. And also we have Salim, she came to Australia to political asylum. However, she was detained in Malena airport from the authorities, and she was deported back to Saudi Arabia. And since 2017, we don't have any information about her. The legal status in Saudi Arabia is unknown. and no official authority is providing any new data about her. And also the defender Mohammed Al-Wataibi, who was deported from Qatar in 2017, and unfortunately he was detained the moment he reached, and right now he is still imprisoned in Saudi Arabia for 17 years. So I'm trying to highlight some of the examples, living examples. So if any colleagues would like to read more, you can check the link that I've shared with you. Also, the transnational repression in the Saudi courts isn't restricted to direct violence. There is email used for the international laws and for the red lists through the Interpol, and also attempts with through cooperating with some of the police apparatus. And the last agreement signed with the Interpol in 2025 to open a regional office in Riyadh to serve the MENA region with a declared cooperation with what is known as the Arab Interpol. And all of the human rights organization is warning on this cooperation because it is happening in an environment where there are a lot of human rights violations. And also the Council of Ministers of Interior, it was founded in 1980. There is no transparency, unlike the Interpol, especially for the violations with the victims, which makes all of its cases politicized. And we can see also another link related to the coercive or forcibly deportation if anyone would like to read more about the Council of Ministers and its role in the transnational repression in Saudi Arabia. As for the digital platforms, Saudi Arabia is using programs to spy, advanced programs to spy on all of the activists diaspora. We have the activist Omar Abdel Aziz, which was documented by Citizen Lab. As well as the activist Yahya Al-Fayri in the UK, who was lately applied for a lawsuit against the Saudi government, and also a lawsuit on the spying of Saudi government and to target him digitally through the same program of Pegasus. And this doesn't stop here. It doesn't only target the defender, but also it targets the family of this person. We have heard a lot of examples and the last testimony of Abdurrahman al-Khalidi and how they targeted his family. So the families inside Saudi Arabia are at risk of group oppression, a group sanction, which includes detaining them, travel bans, and exercising pressure to put pressure on the human rights defender who lives abroad. And this is being used in the Saudi courts, and it's considered one of the most powerful tools because the weakest point for the expelled person is his family, and other human rights Saudi organizations have documented the detaining of members of the defender Abdullah Al-Taymi and his mother, his brother, and depriving them of their rights as a tool to pressure him. The transnational repression, in brief, has a goal behind it. And the goal most of the other repressive countries take a part in it, which is amplifying the image of the state. So the aim is that no one can escape the sanction, whether you were inside the country or outside the country. Of course, the impact of transnational repression affects the journalists, the activists. First of all, it impacts the sense of safety and it empowers fear. Everyone always feels scared or fearing kidnapping, torture, detaining, forcibly deportation, and even killing. Transnational repression causes isolation, and most of them who are in the diaspora have cut their ties with their family members who still live inside in order to avoid any impact on them, and this is a very big burden and very big price to be actually paid. And we do have an idea about the electronic armies we can see and how these countries are trying their best to restrict these efforts of these activists. And lately, the transnational repression have been highlighted, and the United Nations and the Human Rights Commission for Human Rights in June 2025 they have defined what is transnational repression and what are the tools being used, and it provided a clear roadmap for the hosting countries, spread awareness, especially in the asylum countries, including the police, the judicial system, and requests a total protection for these individuals and providing legal support, psychosocial support through structural investigations and a legal clear course, and also stop exporting the programs of spying and having more restrictions on such companies. Lately, the European Union have issued a study in 2025 which has focused on the role of the asylum countries on preventing the transnational repression and how the Interpol is using that and how the human rights defenders should be protected. Then there was an unprecedented European Parliament decision which actually describes this phenomena and which actually speaks about protection measures, visas, renewing the monitoring measures and enhancing the cooperation measures. However, and unfortunately, we still need a binding legal restriction because what was issued by the United Nations and the resolution by the EU Parliament does have a pillar, however, they're not binding for the hosting countries or for the asylum countries. And due to this, we are pushing for a European convention to stop the transnational repression with clear commitments, holding accountability, and how to hand over the wanted defenders and such. Thank you so much, Mrs. Basma. We are very grateful for you and for the efforts of organizations as those supporting the democracy and freedom. In the last 5 years, there wasn't use for the Arab Minister of Interior because they really relied on the Interpol and the red reviews. But the Interpol doesn't interfere in political issues, so that the Saudi Arabia and the other countries have started using whatever is available from the mechanisms to take over and control. They thought that the asylum is surviving, but the message here is that no one is safe from repression. Thank you so much. And you have prepared the ground to go to another topic, which is the migrant workers issue in Saudi Arabia. And I would like to present Mrs. Catriona Fraser, who is a migrant workers researcher in the Business and Human Rights Center. And her work focuses on empowering the migrant workers' rights in the international courses, and through empowering and holding accountable the companies who are accused of these violations. It is doing its role in researching, communicating different of the stakeholders. She will speak more about the economic transformation and human rights and what King Salman's era projects reveal about the relationship to the migrant workers and their rights, and how they are exploited, the Vision 2030 to actually pinkwash, the whitewash its image. However, they are being exploited without any mechanisms for accountability, and this is revealed through the economic transformation in the Gulf, which is not actually separated from the human rights, but it's a bit complex because the political control is what reproduces these violations. So we would like to hear from Mrs. Catriona. And if you do have any questions that you can ask her in the chat. Mrs. Catriona, please, you have the platform.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and for OHHER for organising this event. It's fantastic to be here. I'll be speaking in English, and I do have a presentation to share. I was going to share my screen, so just let me know if you can see the slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see now.
Great, thank you. Yeah, my name's Katrina Fraser. I'm the migrant workers researcher for the Business and Human Rights Center. I'm going to be speaking about renewable energy projects in Saudi Arabia, and specifically about human rights risks to migrant workers who are employed on those projects. But to give firstly a little bit of an overview to our organization, in case you don't know it, you're not familiar with it. So we're a global organization working at the intersection of business and human rights. Our website is really a digital knowledge hub, delivering information on the human rights impacts of companies across the world, including Saudi Arabia. Our migration workstream at BHRC has historically had a specific focus on the Gulf region quite broadly. But in 2024, we began to concentrate on renewable energy and green hydrogen industry in the Gulf. And that was largely because the renewables industry has grown substantially in the region in the past decade. So we wanted to understand what the role of migrant workers was in this diversification of the economy beyond fossil fuels. So we began to track renewable energy projects in the region to discern the scale of the industry and its growth. We created a portal on our website, which is interactive, and I've put a screenshot on the slide that you can see, where we basically tracked these projects. And through this portal, we identified 97 renewables projects in the country, linked to 213 different companies. And we also found from this that there was a substantial presence of multinational companies headquartered outside of the Gulf that are operating in this industry as well. In particular, companies headquartered in Europe, Japan, and China. In November last year, we published our first report on this topic in collaboration with the human rights organization Equidem, who you may be familiar with. That report really showed that the industry, the renewables industry, is likely to grow quite significantly in the Gulf in the coming decade. And it also showed how companies who are operating in that industry are really failing to address severe risks to migrants on these projects. That report included a case study on the UAE, which I won't go into detail here on, but do read that report for more detail on that. Following this, we really began to concentrate on Saudi Arabia specifically for our next report. Why Saudi Arabia? Well, in its Vision 2030 strategy, the country is aiming to systematically restructure the economy away from its historical dependence on oil, including by expanding its renewable energy industry. We've also seen Saudi Arabia sign agreements to export renewable energy to Europe. So we anticipate that the coming decade will likely see an increase in global trade and investment in the industry in the country. It's also important to note that Saudi Arabia is increasingly touting its sustainability to consolidate its soft power abroad while obfuscating and hiding its human rights abuses. That's perhaps most obvious in its bid to host the 2034 Football World Cup. That bid talks about sustainability throughout it. It even mentions the Neom Green Hydrogen project, yet it makes no mention of risks to migrant workers who are labouring on that project or other human rights risks in the country as well. So in this context, we felt it was important that migrant workers' experiences on these projects are surfaced rather than silenced. We worked with investigators to interview 34 Nepali and Bangladeshi workers employed on solar and green hydrogen projects in Saudi Arabia. That includes workers who were involved in construction, so building the projects, but also workers providing logistical support, cleaning and maintenance roles, security workers, and even some workers in office jobs as well. And in October, we published our report on this topic, where we identified abuse on 9 projects that are linked to major multinational companies and international banks financing them. We named 5 projects in the report, which you can see on my screen. We found ultimately that that migrant workers employed on these projects were experiencing unacceptable and extremely egregious human rights abuses. Over half of the workers that we interviewed were experiencing 5 or more indicators of forced labour as defined by the ILO. Now, those abuses ranged really from recruitment throughout employment and then also on return. So to dig a little deeper into that, to begin with violations that we identified during recruitment, all of the workers that we interviewed on these projects were charged recruitment fees for their jobs, generally by recruitment agencies in origin countries. And most of those workers took out loans to cover those costs. Now, the payment of really extortionate fees for jobs led to harmful psychological, financial, and social impacts as well. So, for example, quite frequently, workers were reporting how recruitment debts were reducing the amount of money that they can send home via remittances. That left families back home unable to afford food, clothing, and education, to give just one example. After arrival, we found that workers were paid very low wages, which pushed migrants to work really excessive hours so that they continue to support their families back home. On average, workers were reporting earning around $370 per month without overtime. Low wages was particularly concerning because all of the workers that we spoke to were pushed to migrate out of financial necessity, as shown by the quotes on my screen. I found it quite shocking to contrast the low wages that we found with the profits made by companies at the top of renewable supply chains. So Aqua Power, for example, recorded a net profit of $466 million in 2024 alone. We also found widespread safety risks on these projects for migrants working on them. So most of the workers reported unsafe conditions. Most frequently, that was heat exposure, with workers labouring in over 50-degree heat, but also intense cold during winter, infestations of snakes and scorpions, and other safety risks. We also found 6 migrant deaths were reported by interviewees, including the death of a worker from a suspected heart attack after heat exposure on one of the projects. Workers also reported a range of other abuses, including wage theft and really restricted freedom of movement, particularly in the context of the continued use of the kafala sponsorship system, which I can talk about in more detail if helpful. Finally, we also found that workers were facing really substantial barriers accessing remedy after they reported abuses due to a culture of fear across these projects and severe reprisals for complaints. So no worker that we interviewed was asked about their working conditions by their employer, and around a third of workers who we spoke to said that they'd faced retaliation when they raised complaints. And most commonly that was sort of arrest, dismissal, and deportation. Finally, we also the findings really paint a picture of deeply concerning human rights abuses. So unfortunately, we also found that companies that have business connections to these projects weren't doing enough to tackle these really heightened risks. I won't go into too much detail onto this policy assessment. Just to give a very brief overview, essentially, we found that most companies that were constructing these projects or developing these projects didn't have a human rights policy aligned with international standards. And most also failed to publicly recognize migrants as an at-risk group or as a key stakeholder to engage with. What do these findings tell us? Well, across the testimony, workers often emphasized really concerning level of dehumanization. That was a thread that really ran through all of the workers' interviews. They said they were treated like they were animals or machines and were denied their basic human rights. There was also a high level of correlation between workers' interviews, so between different workers' testimony, and also across projects, which suggests that these abuses are really quite widespread. And those abuses were exacerbated by the structure of the industry and the structure of migration governance in Saudi Arabia as well. So things like the isolation of projects, things like high levels of subcontracting, and the fact that protests are banned. And so that shows that these risks are systemic, they're industry-wide, and so that systemic change is what is needed. Ultimately, the research also shows that companies have to do more to ensure that a transition to renewable energy is not just fast, but it's also fair as well. Just to briefly touch on some other research that the HRC has done in the context of Saudi Arabia. So we have done our specific focus on renewable energy, but we also maintain a database of abuses impacting migrant workers in other sectors. So this database records cases of human rights abuses worldwide, including in Saudi Arabia. It's based on public reporting, so articles by journalists, by NGOs, even public disclosure by companies and investors too. And really our database is just the tip of the iceberg. It's relying on public reporting. So in countries like Saudi Arabia, where there is significant restrictions on freedom of expression, we know that we are undercounting and we're just getting the tip of the iceberg of abuses that we're seeing. However, I did want to just give a brief overview of the data that we have in Saudi Arabia to show some of the key trends from this year. So this is from January to the end of November. During this period, we recorded 52 cases impacting migrant workers in the country, and that was the third highest number of cases of any country worldwide. And it was particularly impacting workers from South Asia and East Africa. The most frequently reported human rights abuse was restricted access to remedy. So that was in particular detention and deportation for raising complaints, but also employers refusing to provide compensation and companies even refusing to repatriate the bodies of workers who had died. There was also a very high number of deaths relative to other countries and significant safety violations, among other abuses. As you can see, the construction sector was the sector where we most frequently recorded human rights violations, but we also recorded a high number of cases in cleaning and maintenance, among other sectors as well. And if anyone's interested in this data, I'd be happy to share more. Just finally, what can companies actually do here? Well, in renewable energy and beyond, they should be conducting human rights due diligence, which means identifying risks in a particular jurisdiction and thinking about how that changes depending on workers' nationality or gender or migration status. They should also be preventing those risks and accounting for those risks, including by tackling the root cause of the problem. Finally, they can also support with remediation, particularly if a company hasn't directly caused the remediation themselves. So, for example, if a subcontractor or a supplier in Saudi Arabia is causing an abuse, companies higher up the value chain should use their power and leverage to try and create that change. That can look like, for example, linking business incentives to human rights performance or communicating the possibility of disengaging with a company if it doesn't meet human rights expectations. And then you can also add pressure on investors. These are really key actors in global markets. They're stewards of capital in Saudi Arabia as elsewhere. Investors should be using their leverage to engage with companies in the region. They should be communicating consequences of failing to meet human rights targets. And they can also implement their own grievance mechanisms as well, so that workers can communicate with investor companies to highlight when things are going, when human rights abuses are taking place. So these are just some of the ways in which businesses operating in a high-risk environment like Saudi Arabia can and should be using their leverage to create change, and ensure that migrants whose labour they rely on, the rights of these workers are respected. That's everything from me. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا أستاذة كاتريونا. نشكرك على تقديم الإحصاءات وعلى تقديم
Thank you,
أرقام
Dr. Catriona. Thank you for providing all of these data and numbers which reflect the reality in Saudi Arabia. Actually, that the migrant workers are being subject to human rights violations away from all of those monitoring because of their fragile posts. So thank you, and we thank the Business and Human Rights Center, and we do hope that we will share information with everyone who is interested and to do further networking and the business and human rights field, because this should be core while addressing the human rights in Saudi Arabia. So thank you again. And as we have listened to live testimonies yesterday from some of the human rights defenders and the activists, today we will continue as such. And I would like to present Mr. Mohammed Al-Qudaymi, who is a Syrian businessman who has lived for years in Saudi Arabia and experienced himself the Catholicism from economic, legal, and human rights aspects. He will tell us more about his experience in the kafala system and how it impacted him and how he wasn't legally just unjustly judged in a system where the migrant worker is not being treated equally. Good evening, everyone. And I thank everyone who has organized this conference. My name is Mohammed Abdullah Al-Qudaymi. I'm a Syrian national. I was living in Saudi Arabia for a long time, and I went there in 2011 because of the war which happened in Syria. With my brothers, we used to work in trade, and we had a company of transportation. In 2011, war happened in Syria, and it was very difficult for us to remain there. And we had big numbers of trucks in Damascus, and because we were afraid that it will be bombed, we went to Saudi Arabia and Jordan. I went to Saudi Arabia, apartment to the Saudi Arabia. We have registered it in the commercial registry in Al Zarqa in Jordan and another part in Saudi Arabia. And I've left my brothers in Jordan. I went to Saudi Arabia to invest there. What happened in 2011, 2012, the embassies were closed between Syria and Saudi Arabia, and the visa has stopped for the Syrian nationals. And I was presenting or applying for the investment committee, and through legal ways, we have brought these trucks through the borders. And I've started referring back to the investment administration body. And I waited for a while, but I didn't have luck because of the visas that were stopped for the Syrians and due to the security situation in Syria. This led me that all of my properties were in the name of the Saudi guarantor in Al Grayat region, which is at the Jordanian borders. The costs were very great and the number was big. We waited 2013, 2014, and we didn't find any advance in bringing back the visas for Syrians. So I put all my properties in the name of another person, and in warehouses I put my properties, and I waited in 2015. I lost hope to go back to Syria or to have embassies open back between Saudi Arabia and Syria.
طبعا هون مضرور اني
Of course, here I
شركة
was
تدل على طرف
obliged
كل
to have a guarantor of a company or a register.
كانت حرمة سعودية من حفر الباطن
There was a
السجل
Saudi
التجاري مقابل
woman.
مادي والآليات
In
كلها
exchange
محفوظة
for money,
بالمستودعات على أمل يا نرجع من السعودية
she
أو أيضا
approached to
تصير
be a guarantor, and all of these trucks were in the
ابن
warehouses in
ابن
hopes that we either get a
الكفيل كان هو
visa or we
المستأجر
leave Saudi Arabia. The
شكله
son
قنع
of the guarantor was
يعني
the
صار
legal
تسمع حديث
proxy.
إنه أنا عندي
It
صار كثير
appears
ضخم
that he
بالساحل
became
حاطط الأملاك
very
والمصاري
selfish,
هذا
and
الشيء
he
سبب رعب عندي
heard rumors that I have a lot
فقررت
of
أنا
trucks,
بال
and
2015
this
فقدت
actually
الأمل إني
scared
أرجع
me.
للأردن لعند
So I
أخوتي
asked
لعند
in
السوريين المستأجر أو إني
2015,
يعني
and I decided to
ألاقي أي
go
طريق
back
ثاني
to
سوريا كان الوضع كثير
Jordan
صعب للرجعة
to my brothers.
فطلب
I
مبلغ مالي
wasn't
كبير
able to
ما يقارب
I wasn't able
ريال
to go
سعودي
back to
أنا
Syria,
وافقت
and
طبعا لأن
he
الأملاك برا
demanded for a
يعني
very big amount. Of course, I have approved because the properties were in
حكيت
millions of
الأحداث
dollars.
على طلب المبلغ ووافقت عليه
He
ما
has
رضيت
requested this
أنزل
amount,
المبلغ
and I have approved it, but I
جد إلا
didn't
خاص
approve
ناس تكون شخص يعني
handing the
موثوق
amount over in
للطرفين
hand
مقابل تنازل على الأملاك
only
مقابل
through a
أرسل ال
trusted
200,000
person
ريال
and
مباشرة
only through taking
طلب
the
المبلغ تحويل فأنا رفضت قصة التحويل
official
أنا
documents, and
شخص
I did
مسؤول
refuse
كان هو
transferring the
مدير
money.
الشرطة السابق
I wanted this
الشخص
process to
صديقي
be
وكنت
through
مستأجر أنا منه تقريبا معرض سيارات
this
في
person
منطقة الدمام
directly. He was an old friend of mine, and
مباشرة
I
هون
have
رفضت
rented
أنا تحويل المبلغ
a place from him in the Dammam area. I
مباشر
refused to
جتني رسالة من
transfer
وزارة
this amount.
الداخلية بتوكيل
Then I
الدمام
received a letter from the
لجأت
Ministry
فورا
of
ثاني
Interior
يوم
Affairs
إلى
and
أمير المنطقة الشرقية
stopping my
لمحكمة النائب
services. I have
وطلب
sought
حمايتي
the
ما
Prince
طلبت
Saud
إنه
bin
يرجع
Naif
أموالي أو
and
أي شيء
sought
طلبت الحماية
that
إنه
I
أنا
be protected. I
في
didn't even
انتهاك في
ask to
فساد
retrieve
إداري في
my
استغلال سلطة
properties, and I
لتهريب
asked, why is this happening?
فطلبته
Do I have any corruption or
تفاجأت
anything?
يومين
Am I
ثلاثة من
wanted
بعد الشكوى
after
للأمن
2 or 3 days
وديت
after
محامي
this
على
complaint?
منطقة حفر
I've
الباطن
sent an
بالمرأة
attorney to Al
كان
Hafr
عنده
al
100
Batan
سجل
area,
تجاري
which I'm not really
دلائل
aware
من
of,
إدارة
but there
المباحث
I had the
المكتب الجنائي
commercial
مدير المكتب الجنائي
registry.
نفسه
And the criminal
عامل علي
investigation
تعديل
department
وحاطط
have
باسمي
spread a circular in
الخط
my name
اختلاس
that I
أموال
be
تزوير أملاك
arrested
إسقاط
for
ملفات تقريبا خمس ست
whitewashing,
قضايا قدرت
corruption,
أوصل
around like
لرقم القضية
5 to 6 cases.
ورجعت الأمير مرة ثانية تقريبا بعد
And I
شهر
have referred
لأنه مدير
back to the
المباحث أنا
prince
وقرايبي
after
بحفر
1 week
الباطن أنا
that
لا
the
بعرفه ولا بعرف
director of
تصرفاته أنا قصتي
investigation
إنه في واحد اثنين
wants
ثلاثة
me, and
بطلع
I
برا
don't even know him
المنطقة
in
السعودية
person.
فورا
And this is my actual
المهم إنه
story.
أنا أطلب الحماية
If you want, I can leave
بنفس
Saudi
الليلة
Arabia
تقريبا
as
الساعة
once.
11 بالليل طبعا وصل الخبر لمدير المباحث انه انا ادعيت عليه رفعت شكوى ضده
Of
للامير
course, around
المنطقه داهم بيتي تقريبا شي الساعه 11 ونص بالليل قطعوا الكهرباء
11
عن
p.m.
الشقه عناصر
The
امن
director
كان
of the
حوالي 12
investigation department
سياره
would know that there was a complaint submitted by
طلعوا على
me to the
البيت
prince, and then they
بس
cut the
فتحت الباب كان
electricity of
في
my house. 3
معرض
persons
المباحث
came to me. They've
فقال انا
treated
سؤالي
me
تفضل
with
انت
abuse and
وعائلتك
violence.
شو
And of course,
وين
I asked them,
باي طريقه انت
in
جاي
what
داهم
right
بيتي
you
عندك
are
اطفال
coming
عندي كذا
here
فقال
to
انت
my
سنك
house?
اكبر
I have
مني انا
children
ضابط
and
مسؤول
such.
عن
He told me,
المهنه
I'm an officer, you are an older man, I don't have to humiliate you,
اخذونا
come
قال
with
جيب
me. I
الجوازات جيب
told
الاطفال
them
جيب الزوجه
I can leave Saudi
اخذونا على
Arabia at
قسم
once.
بقسم شرطه
Then
او
they asked
قسم
me to
امن
bring the passports of
جنوب
myself, the
الدمام
children, and the wife, and we all
حطونا
went
بغرفه
together in
المعسكر
the Dammam Center
ممهد
and one
بالعربي
of the military
طبعا اطفالي انا
halls.
اعمارهم
Of course, my
بالدمام
children ages
10 9
10, 9
تقريبا
years old,
7
7
وعندي
years
طفل
old,
صغير 4
and also the youngest
حطونا
is 4
بغرفة
years
المعسكر
old.
كان
We were
شهر
placed in
12
this military room
برد
in
بالدمام كان برد
December.
كثير
In
ما
Dammam,
جابوا
it was
ما
really
جابوا
cold.
اكل
They didn't bring
ضلينا
any
جالسين
blankets,
بغرفة
any
العسكر
food.
لثاني يوم
We were
فهون
sitting there for the
ثبتت
next day.
التهمة
Here they did the
يلي عملته بالمعسكر
manipulation and
فأنا
falsification
كنت
of the
أطلب
charge.
أفتح الباب
this is what I knew at last. I used to knock at the door and ask them that I do have children, they do need food, blankets. They would always reply to me, you know what you did? And I know that the charge is actually because I have complained against the director of the investigation department before the prince. Until the next day, one officer, out of pity, brought some chicken and rice after like 40 to 50 hours of detaining for the sake of the children. Then we were told that we should be deported outside Saudi Arabia. We will take you to the deporting of Al Khubar and your wife to the deportation station for Al Khubar and the children for the juvenile deportation. Do you mean you're taking them to the prison? What did my children do? They have all the legal documents, passports, entry visas. The only issue I have is the complaint I submitted to the prince against the director of the investigation department. Here he tried to take the children from their mother. One of my daughters, out of fear, she was paralyzed in the seventh nerve in her face, and the rest of the children, they started peeing on their clothes out of fear. They took me directly to Al Khubar deportation station, and I didn't really know what they did or what they want to do. So I went to the deportation station, and I didn't know what they will do to my wife or what will they accuse her of. After around 8 days in the prison, the head of the prison asked for me, called for me, and asked where are my passports. And they said that they want to deport me in Syria. And I told them I can't go back to Syria. Two of my brothers were killed out of religious backgrounds, and others were imprisoned in Sinai. And of course, I have documented all of that with their names. I told him I can't go back to Syria due to the security situation. Probably in the Damascus airport, we will be beheaded there. We cannot go back there. He said, I have nothing to do with you. I told him I can go to Dubai, to Erbil. Then he said, you can only go to Syria. So they brought me back to prison, and I've refused the idea for like 50 days. Around 59 days, the COVID has started. This was in 2020. They had a lot of injuries in the prison. A lot died from the Bengali workers. The prison is very similar to Sinai prison. And if you think I'm a liar, you can go back to the cameras in the prisons and check the numbers. Around 1,803 floors. Even the officers couldn't check the prisoners to clean the cells or to provide any services. We were isolated due to COVID. Only the ambulances would come wearing the yellow uniform and take out those who died. I also had COVID. And there they wanted to separate the prisons in Riyadh and in Al Khubar. A part of them were taken, especially the Ethiopians who entered illegally, they were taken to Riyadh. Then I had the approval that I should deport to any country I want other than Syria. So I got visas for Sudan, and I met with my wife and children at Al Dammam airport. When we were separated from each other, I knew that they were put in the begging center in a third floor. My children had sickness, physical-wise, psychological-wise. And even my wife and my children, the whole situation which they have encountered, the insects that were there, they didn't know that youngest child had a tab, and my wife has actually photoshooted everything, and they were isolated from everyone else. The head of the center would only say that they are very dangerous people and they were prohibited from any visits. While I was in the prison, I didn't know anything about them. I didn't have any communication about them, and our phones were confiscated in Al Dammam airport when we wanted to go to Sudan airplane. The aviation throughout the world has stopped. The officer was very respectful. He told me, I don't know and I don't believe what happened with you. You're anti-mom and you are charged with other. He told me, take your wife and children and go back. I had around 2 or 3 attorneys who I have assigned for the different charges. I have sought Riyadh. My daughter, a medical situation who had a paralysis, was very bad in her eyes and her mouth to the left side. Directly, I got the attorney and said that I want to provide a complaint. I will go to the Royal Diwan, to the Crown Prince, to the public prosecutor, to all the official authorities for what happened to my children and my wife. They are legal. They are not related to what happened to their properties. I have sought every competent authority, and it's because my opponent was a big officer that I never found an outcome. I have checked all of the competent authorities in Saudi Arabia, and I have proof and evidence for what happened to me and my wife and children through an attorney. And in December, the director of the prison said that you should leave Saudi Arabia. I said there is no issue, but I have an issue in combating corruption, and I was investigated with, and it happened that it's an exploitation of authority. He said, I have nothing to do with this. I'm only recommending this to you. Again, they have cut off the electricity of the place I was living in through a very abusing way. So I opened the door, and then they told me when I opened my door, you have the investigation department with you, and they have took me away violently. I told them my children had really suffered from the way you have treated us. I will leave Saudi Arabia very easily. You don't have to use any violence with me. So I have the names of all the officers, because then I applied before the criminal court where I was judged upon to be an innocent. One of the officers have held me from my neck, and his nails were actually planted in my skin, and we pushed all together, and we fell from the first floor on the stairs. They would attribute this that I was resisting them. Of course, the wife held the phone and wanted to photoshoot what happened to present it to the king, but one of the militants have hit my wife on her shoulder, and she bounced against the wall, and I told them, you don't have to use violence. My daughter is paralyzed. I will leave Saudi Arabia, but I have evidence and the different issues before the different authorities. We went in the car, and in the car told me, why are you arguing with me, you dog? And I told him, you have no right to call me as such. Then they started hitting me until they broke down my teeth, and they hit me very in a barbaric way on my head. They took me to the security center in Al Dammam. One of the officers who was told that I was resisting them, he asked me, why did you resist? I said, I'm not resisting. I'm only asking to be treated very calmly because of my children. He hit me on my face, and then they placed me in a room outside the behind the door, and then they started kicking the door against me and I fainted after all of this.
بتوقع نص ساعة ساعة ما بعرف كت على وجهي
After like half an hour or an hour, one of the soldiers have thrown water over me. Then they took me to the Western Police to organize or to write down police minutes. Also, I know the name of the officer. I didn't have the chance to speak one word, and I was imprisoned there for one night. I asked, don't you want to hear my testimony? He said, like, eat the animal's food. Then I was referred to the public prosecution. I was covered with blood, even my clothes. The public or prosecutor or the investigators was very respectful, and they said, you are charged with resisting. Look at me, this is not true. Look to how I look. Then he said, I will issue that you are innocent. Then I was told that I should be expelled, and the opponent, who was an officer, that my presence in the kingdom is dangerous. So I was taken to the deportation center, and there, since the public prosecution have released me, then the security members would bring a paper. He broke my left hand, nose. I remained in the prison for like 4 sessions before the criminal court, and for like 2 months. The judge wouldn't even accept to hear my testimony. After around 2 months, I was imprisoned for 60 days. They will call it a public right. I don't know exactly. I said that I didn't resist, and you can bring my family and children. Everything was abuse and violence. He judged upon my innocence. The prison also was undescribable. There are no services whatsoever. The human rights Zaman branch will, when they will pay a visit for that center, they will bring the detainees to the upper services. Then I chose Erbil to leave, and not Syria, because we are wanted in Syria. And in Erbil, I have lost all my properties, house, car. In Erbil, I treated my children, especially my daughter. I have medical reports. Thank you so much, Mr. Muhammad, for your intervention. And I've never heard such a courageous testimony with such painful details, with all what you have encountered. And on behalf of the organization, we would want to have a more detailed interview with you, because there are a lot of levels of oppression which we can write a lot about it and speak a lot about it. So I thank you for your courage. And now I would like to go to our other speaker, Mr. Mohammed An-Namani, who will speak briefly about the violations of Saudi Arabia during the war in Yemen. And we have a lot to be said there. We have a lot of testimonies there. Mr. Mohammed, please, if you can be brief.
دكتور محمد، حضرتك معانا؟ اوكي. اعتقد ان الانترنت
I think that the internet connection
به عطل او حاجه
has a technical issue.
لاخر جدول اعمالنا في
So by this, we reach the end of the agenda in the day 2 on the 5th annual conference. I would like to ask for Mr. Ali Dubaisi, the executive director for the organization, to have a closure speech. And I would like to thank all of you on behalf of me and the organization. Mr. Ali Dubaisi, please, you have the platform. Thank you, Mrs. Yasmin. And thank you for all the participants for their speeches. And I think Dr. Mohammed is still in the list. And I'm not sure if he can hear me or not.
نعم أستاذ علي، احنا بنحاول نوصل لدكتور محمد.
Mr. Ali, we are trying to reach Dr. Mohammed. I hope that he has heard
لكن
us.
ما عليه يعني إذا عاد بعد كلمة حضرتك طبعا.
However, even if he comes back after your closure speech, we would like to hear his testimony. So, as you have mentioned, Mrs. Yasmin, the time isn't actually sufficient to speak and also to hear the testimony of Dr. Muhammad Al-Qutaimi. And in the first chance, we will have a more detailed interview with him on his testimony. He's part of thousands who are an example of the horrific violations which happens in this country and which we don't hear about. 10 years after the rule of Mohammed bin Salman, here we reach the closure of our 5th annual conference. Here we reach day 2 for the 5th annual conference, which specialized to assess a whole decade. Excuse me, there is a call from Dr. Muhammad. Probably he has something important. I hope he can hear us and participate.
أنا مش شايفاه في قائمة الحضور الآن.
I can no longer see him in the participants list.
حضرتك ميوت أستاذ علي.
دكتور محمد يقول افتحوا لي المايك.
Dr. Muhammad is saying just open the mic. Probably there is a technical issue. He didn't know how to solve it. I asked him to re-enter to the platform.
نعتمد على زملائنا التقنيين.
ممكن لو أحببتي يعني أي سؤال أستاذ ياسمين لديك من المشاركين يعني.
If you have any question from the participants, probably we have time to answer it. We have a lot of questions, especially after the very impacting testimony from Mr. Muhammad. As for the many violations he was subject to is an example of individual violations which happen for the citizens and the migrant workers inside Saudi Arabia and in the diaspora. The most important of it is the authority of deportation in Saudi Arabia, and despite that, the international law prohibits the deportation of the immigrants. Welcome, Mr. Muhammad. Thank you, Yasmin. I've presented you and I was commenting. You have closed the microphone. We apologize for this.
اتفضل قدام حضرتك 5 دقائق.
You have around 5 minutes.
حصل مشاكل تقنية.
شكرا.
We had technical issues, so we apologize. We thank Mr. Ali Atubaisi for inviting me to participate in this conference. If the camera works, can you please turn it on?
وشكرا للأخت ياسمين على إدارة هذه.
And thank you for Mrs. Yasmin for moderating this event, and I salute the
لتسليط الضوء
efforts of the European Saudi Organization for highlighting the violations of human rights in Saudi Arabia, which trespasses the political scene and has been transferred to a lot of countries. And especially Yemen, which is always violated by Saudi Arabia since 1934, when Saudi Arabia occupied some territories, Jizan, Asir, all the way to 1967, when Saudi Arabia has refused to annex all provinces of Shabwa, Hadramaut to the Republic of Yemen, and how UK had demanded to not annex these regions also to Yemen. And afterwards, to 1969, when Saudi Arabia has occupied Al-Wadiya area and As-Suruda in order to reach to the Arab Sea. Actually, the Saudi violations for Yemen, whether north or south, have exceeded or trespassed to an unbelievable extent. It caused the immigration of the population and demographic change, and it has stolen a lot of wealth and has exploded a lot of wells of petroleum. And we have all watched how at the end how Saudi Arabia has participated in supporting the armed groups in the south of Yemen or in the north, and to explode wars in 1979 and 1994 between the Yemenis. Today, and after 2015, the violations of Saudi Arabia to Yemen were increasing, as the Saudi Arabia has formed an Arab international coalition led by it and led by the United Arab Emirates to occupy Yemen. And had an aggression against Yemen and a military occupation for these southern provinces under the pretext of bringing back sovereignty, although with the confessions of the United Nations Commissioner of Yemen, that Yemen has failed the UK dialogue. Today we have more than 4,000 children in Yemen who are deprived from education, and we have tens of thousands of buildings destroyed, including factories, schools, nurseries, which were demolished because of the Saudi aggression against Yemen. We have tens of thousands of Yemenis whose rights are being violated, who are being expelled from Saudi Arabia, to the extent that Saudi Arabia preventing Yemenis from working and even from pilgrimage in the Medina and Mecca. So the issue of Saudi Arabia today was able to achieve its goals, which it didn't or wasn't able to do in 1967 in the southern provinces, as it took over the Hadramaut, Sabwa, Al-Mahra, and give this role to the Emirates, considering that the truce agreement between Sana'a government, and this requires that the occupation withdraws from these southern occupied provinces. Today, Saudi Arabia still imprisons a lot of Yemenis who oppose the war also in Yemen, and they are besieging in economic besiege against Yemen. It is subjecting its own laws on Yemen. It wants to restrict everything in Yemen, and it's committing crimes against humanity. If you go back a little bit, we will find that Saudi Arabia up till today bombing some of the houses of the citizens in Saada and killing, destroying their agriculture, killing their livestock, displacing them, taking away all of the legal rights and living in safety. Saudi Arabia is taking
المساندة
these capabilities
مع
away from them
الإمارات في
through
إدارة الشؤون
supporting
السرية في
that with
اليمن
the
هناك
United
العشرات
Arab
من
Emirates through
المعتقلين ليس من
managing the
اليمنيين
secret
بل أيضا
prisons,
من المعارضين
not only
السياسيين
with
الذين تم
Yemeni
اعتقالهم
detainees, but
وسجنهم
also with
في هذه
Saudi
السجون بمجرد أنهم كانوا
opponents
طلبة
who
في أحد
were
الأنظمة
imprisoned
في
just because
الجامعات
that they
اليمنية بسبب
were
الدخول
studying in
العالية
Yemeni
للدراسة أو
universities
بسبب
due to the
أنهم
high
كانوا
cost of study in Saudi
يعملون
Arabia, or
في
because
السعودية
that they were
وحصلوا
working
على الإقامة
in Saudi
أمام
Arabia and
السعودية
they
بسبب
had
حرب
a visa there,
2015
but because
وعدوانها
of the
عليهم
war
قامت
in
بمطالبة
2015 and its
بمصادرة
aggression, it has
أموالهم
confiscated
إقامتهم
their
وربما حدث
visas, their
حدث
residence
كذا
permits.
على
And I think one of the
موضوع
colleagues yesterday have spoken
الاستثمارات
about
السعودية
the
في
Saudi
جزيرة
investments
جدة
in
لو لاحظنا
Jeddah.
بأن
So
السعودية
we can
صادرة
notice that Saudi
الآلاف
Arabia has
من
confiscated
الرذائل من
thousands
الممتلكات
of
الخاصة
buildings,
لليمنيين
of private
الذين
properties for Yemenis,
امتلكوها على مدى 50 سنة.
which they
اليوم
have
في ظرف
left
خطة 2030
since 50
قام
years,
الفقر
which they had
المعروف
since
بولد
50 years.
سلمان
And
قاتل أطفال
the
اليمن
criminal Mohammed bin Salman
بتدمير كل
killed
شيء
the children of Yemen
لهؤلاء
by destroying
المواطنين
everything for these
لعل
citizens.
البعض منهم أيضا متجنس
Some
في
of them
الجنسية السعودية قام بتدمير
had the Saudi
منازلهم
national, they have
بتشريدهم
destroyed
بتهجيرهم.
their
هناك
houses,
عشرات
displaced
الآلاف
them.
من المواطنين
Tons of
ربما
these citizens
استطاعوا أن يهاجروا أن
were able
يفلسوا
to
من هذا العقاب
immigrate
بانتقالهم
and to escape
إلى
this
مدينة
sanction and
صلالة
moving
في
to
سلطنة عمان.
Salalah
وهناك
city and
عدد من هؤلاء
the Sultanate
المواطنين
of Oman.
الذين هم
However, a
يمنيين
part of
ولكن
these
أيضا
citizens who
بأصول
are Yemenis,
سودانية
but
وبعضهم
who
بأصول
have
صومالية
Sudanese
تعرضوا
origins
للعديد
or
من
Somali
الانتهاكات داخل
origins,
السعودية.
were
ولا
subject
زالت
to many
السعودية حتى
violations
يومنا
inside Saudi Arabia.
تقصف
And
مناطق
up to
الحدود
yesterday,
المشتركة
Saudi
على
Arabia
الرغم
is still
من
bombing the
اتفاقية
common
الهدنة
borders
التي
despite the
تمت
truce agreement which was
بينهم
signed
وبين حكومة صنعاء والاتفاق
between them
الأوسط
and between
الإيراني
Sana'a government and
السعودي
with the
برعاية الصين
Irani-Saudi
على الهدنة
agreement with the sponsorship
في
of
اليمن. أيضا
China
السعودية
for
ما
the
زالت
truce in Yemen. However,
تستمتع
Saudi Arabia is still
برعايتها
violating
بانتهاكها
this and
لحقوق
enjoying its
اليمنيين في اليمن.
crimes, its
وأعتقد
violation for human
أخذنا
rights in Yemen.
ياسمين
And
أعطتنا
I
5
think
دقائق وهذا
Mrs.
موضوع بحاجة
Yasmin gave us
حقيقة
5 minutes, and this
بحاجة إلى أن
issue
يبحث عمل كبير جدا
requires
على
for a
اعتبار أننا
more
نحن
detailed workshop,
كيمنيين
because
وكناشطين
we
أيضا
as
في
Yemenis and as
منظمات حقوق
activists
الإنسان
and
نستطيع
human rights
أن
organizations, we
ننقل
can
هذه الانتهاكات
transfer
إلى المفوضية
these
الدولية لحقوق
uh,
الإنسان.
violations
وأيضا
for the
نقدر
Human Rights Commission
أن نحاكم هذا النظام على
and to
ارتكابه
hold this regime
جرائم ضد
accountable for
الإنسانية
committing
ليست فقط
crimes against the humanity,
وحدها
not just
وإنما
in Yemen
أيضا
only, but
في
also
في السعودية وفي
in
الحجاز
Saudi
وفي
Arabia, in Al-Hijaz,
البحرين وفي
in
لبنان
Bahrain,
وفي
in
سوريا
Lebanon,
وفي
in
العراق.
Syria, in
وأعتقد
Iraq.
أنه علينا أن
And
نكثف
I think that we
من مثل
should
هذه المجتمعات
double our
وكشف
efforts in
الأساليب
organizing such
الخطيرة التي
events
تمارسها
or
هذه الأسر
conferences
الحاكمة
to unveil all of these
لأرض
awful
الجزيرة
practices
العربية
by the
وهذه
royal
الأماكن
family,
المقدسة من العالم. وشكرا.
especially against the
شكرا
sacred
جزيلا دكتور
places
محمد
around the
ناهي.
world. Thank
وأشكرك
you,
على
Dr. Mohammed. I salute
هذه
you and
الإفادة.
for your very
وافقك الرأي في ضرورة وجوب
impressive
العمل على
intervention. I do agree with you that we should work more in detail and double our efforts for Yemen, because it's related to the different violations of human rights. I think that Yemen is an excellent example that we should focus more on. Thank you, and I thank all of the attendees and speakers. And as we promise that we will have different sessions to cover all of these subjects in more detail and depth. Thank you so much for your participation. Now we will be with Mr. Ali Adubaisi, the Executive Director for the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights. Thank you so much, Mrs. Yasmin. Actually, I'm astonished. I always say for whoever I speak with that the outcomes are way more than we know, and I was really astonished by the many details I heard, especially with the last one by Dr. Mohammed, We do know each other since years ago. However, some details still surprise us or take us by astonishment, which are really shocking. And the power of evilness which the Saudi Arabia has is really big that we cannot really cover in this conference. This is the closure speech for the conference, but not the closure work for us. We hope that all of these efforts will be doubled, and we thank you all, the attendees, the speakers in day 1, day 2, the different human rights organizations today as we reach the closure of the 5th annual conference of our organization, which we covered the practices of King Salman rule and his son and the oppression system inside Saudi Arabia, outside Saudi Arabia. They were 10 years filled with many violations, death penalty, torture, engineering, restructuring, restricting the freedoms, repression, oppression. But this is not the only image. Also, this decade have witnessed a human rights review and documenting all of these cases and civil resistance. And this accumulating experience, I will suggest like 5 points, not just as recommendations, but in general, an overview or a vision for our reality. First of all, to the families, relatives, and friends of the victims, and to the victims themselves. There is a feeling by many activists and all of the events which are held outside that we are running short from working for you. We have a feeling that please excuse us if we didn't work enough, and we know that your needs are high, and we need to double our efforts, and we do realize the risks which the authorities may subject if we wanted to unveil any of the truth. But the information on the truth of what's happening from the inside could be the spark for any legal effort. So any simple effort can form a push for our efforts. Second, for the community of victims who was in our country, whether Muhammad or any other, and immigrated to their country and who had violations of human rights, not just here in our organization, but in the whole civil society organizations abroad. We have open hearts, open hands to advocate and to support. So any immigrant who had their rights violated in Saudi Arabia, please do communicate with this civil society and the diaspora, and we will try our best to help. Third, to the human rights organizations, Saudi Arabia is investing big resources to control the human rights work. I'm saying that because sometimes there is a bit of frustration. However, Saudi Arabia is paying a lot of effort to control this through the media or legal-wise, and this is a signal that our work is actually working. The official silence, it doesn't mean that they don't care. It's a way of strategy on how to deal with the pressure which is happening in the diaspora. That's why we should work relentlessly and develop it, because it's a necessity and because it has tangible outcomes more than it shows in the official declarations. Fourth, for the media and journalism centers, Saudi Arabia depends on the public relations and the campaigns to whitewash their images, and also the free speech, the free media is working on unveiling what's actually happening in reality. And we really appreciate all of the institutions who were still professional despite the pressures, but we call for further events and this, and to provide further documented information. Fifth, to the civil society immigrating from Saudi Arabia and diaspora, and despite being spread in the asylum, It establishes a very important network to communicate with the different parts of the world. The Saudi Arabia thought that with its practices, people will be silent, but this has fired back at it, despite that there are minimal efforts which have accumulated over the years. And here we call to double the efforts with effectiveness, hope, expertise exchange, and developing the tools of work. Fifth, we hope for in 2026 to have a long-term organized work. Experience shows that organized work has better outcomes, and planning opens new horizons and spaces. We do call for all the organizations, journalists, researchers to specialize the next year and developing mechanisms of collecting information, supporting the victims and their families, and documenting all of these violations. At the end, this conference is only one of the stations in a very long course, and in the last 10 years, the documentation and resources have increased, although the violations has increased, and also the awareness have increased international-wise. And I think Mrs. Yasmin is one of those specialists in accountability as per the international law, and probably we can ask her in the upcoming meetings, which is also a spark of home. Also, Mrs. Basma is of those working on the transnational repression and how to deal with it. What is the progress in the different aspects? One last thing, I think that Saudi Arabia today is in a very closed corner. It's trying to go international-wise in different celebrations, events like the Mondial in 2034, the Asian plays, the Formula One, the golf, the wrestling, the festivals, the economic, the cinema, the art, and others. All of this makes Saudi Arabia is besieged and not comfortable in what it's doing from violations, and this opens a door of hope, because in the past case it was isolated, and this openness cannot go in conformity with these practices, and this gives us actually a hope for exercising further pressure. The work will continue, and with doubling the efforts with our partners, we reconfirm that we will stay committed to this course with whole responsibility. Thank you everyone who participated. And for you, Mrs. Yasmin. Thank you, Mr. Ali. I salute you, and I salute all of your efforts and the European Saudi Organization, and I wish you all the best luck in your efforts. And as we reach the end of this fifth annual conference for the organization, we have spent 2 days in covering one of the most complicated and brutal decades in Saudi Arabia and the violations of human rights. We had a lot of testimonies, analysis, painful realities, however, with determination and saying truth in front of power. So in my name and in the name of the organization, I would like to thank everyone who has participated, listened, heard, and participated in its success. Thank you for the speakers, for your courage, for your knowledge. Thank you for everyone who has attended from the different countries' interaction, and for everyone who is continuing the struggle from inside the Saudi Arabia and outside. I was with you, Yasmin, Omar. Thank you so much.
شكرا لكم جميعا، شرفتونا. شكرا للجميع.